Chuck has spent 1,500 days on a deserted island, battling hunger and loneliness every day. To quench his thirst, Chuck collected a bunch of coconuts and tried smashing them with a rock, but the coconuts were too hard and the rocks broke instead. Eventually, he realized he could use the broken rocks as tools and began using the stone fragments to open the coconuts. Finally, he enjoyed the refreshing coconut water. Chuck used to be an executive at a courier company where efficiency was everything. Everything was timed, from packing parcels to visiting his girlfriend and even family dinners. To catch a flight, Chuck exchanged Christmas gifts with his girlfriend in the car. She gave him a pocket watch with her picture on it, so he would think of her every time he checked the time. Chuck gave her a towel, hoping she would think of him every time she washed her hands. Seeing the disappointment in his girlfriend's eyes, Chuck pulled out a delicate little gift box. He and his girlfriend had agreed to wait until he returned from his business trip to open it. Little did he know, his trip would last 1,500 days. During the flight, an accident occurred, and as he faced the imminent danger of life and death, he still managed to grab the pocket watch his girlfriend had given him. When he came to, the plane had already crashed into the sea. Fortunately, Chuck was quick to act in the water. He opened a lifeboat and surfaced, successfully saving his own life while the rest of the crew perished. Chuck was the sole survivor. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but when he opened his eyes again, he had drifted to a deserted island. He tried to call for help, but the pager had been waterlogged and the pocket watch was no longer working. Chuck could only shout desperately, but all he heard in response was the sound of the waves. Some of the packages from the plane had also washed ashore. Chuck picked up the packages, hoping that he could deliver them once he was rescued, showing remarkable dedication even when facing his own survival. Next, Chuck drew a distress signal on the beach and then Chuck made a simple shelter out of the lifeboat and opened the old pocket watch his girlfriend had given him as if she were right there beside him. He sat by the shore, somewhat foolishly, throughout the night. When morning came, he went to the beach and saw that the lifeboat was almost destroyed. Chuck had to find some wood to replace it. To fill his Chuckack, he decided to go fishing, but not only did he catch no fish, he injured his feet on the coral. Chuck had to cut up his pants to make a pair of makeshift cloth shoes, then limped up to the mountain top. From the mountaintop, he surveyed the area and suddenly saw a body floating in the sea. He rushed over and discovered that the person was already dead. After several days, Chuck dragged the body ashore. He was interested in the man's shoes and then found a flashlight on him. After searching through these items, Chuck, still with some conscience, dug a hole to bury the man and carved a makeshift chuckstone on a rock. Seeing this scene, Chuck was deeply moved. He thought about how he used to be so strict with everyone and wondered who would bury him if he had died. He modified the man's leather shoes into a comfortable pair of sandals for himself. One day, while relieving himself in the woods, Chuck discovered dew on dry leaves. After days without food or water, he quickly grabbed a coconut shell and carefully collected the dew. With this, he resolved his drinking water problem and now needed to figure out how to fill his stomach. After a whole day of hard work, Chuck hadn't even caught a single fish scale. As night fell, Chuck clutched his empty stomach and thought about the delicious food he used to waste so carelessly. If only he had known not to waste food. At that moment, a faint light appeared on the sea. Seeing a ship approaching, Chuck excitedly shouted. He turned on the flashlight to signal, but it was too dark for the crew to see him. Soon it was dawn. Instead of waiting passively, he decided to take a risk. Chuck climbed into the small dinghy and rowed towards the cargo ship. The waves continuously hindered him. As Chuck saw a massive wave approaching, he paddled desperately, but the dinghy couldn't withstand the ocean waves. A towering wave flipped both him and the boat. Coral cut his thigh and the dinghy was damaged. This was his first failure to escape. After reaching the shore, Chuck quickly tied a cloth around his wound. However, his bad luck continued as a storm suddenly hit. Chuck hurriedly covered the packages with the damaged dinghy and shivered in a cave to rest. Fortunately, there was a pool of clean water in the cave. Chuck didn't care about its cleanliness and drank from it. However, due to excessive blood loss, he fainted. When the rain stopped and the sky cleared, Chuck reignited his determination. He began to open the packages, hoping to find survival essentials. The first package contained a cassette tape, the second one a divorce agreement, and the next was a volleyball. There were also ice skates and even a dress. Only one package remained, and he hoped it contained something useful. Chuck was about to open it when he noticed the winged design on the package. He hesitated and decided not to open it. This might be his last hope. As long as he didn't open it, he would maintain his belief in survival. Although the items he had already opened seemed useless, they weren't entirely without value. For example, the sharp ice skates could be used for cutting, the shoelaces could serve as bandages, the unpacked boxes could be used as a bed, and the lace from the dress could be used for fishing. Chuck tasted meat for the first time on the deserted island. He sharpened a wooden stick with the ice skates and forcefully thrust it into a rock crevice, pulling out a large crab. However, eating it raw was quite unappetizing, so he remembered the method of making fire by friction. It seemed simple but was actually very difficult. Chuck's hands were almost smoking from rubbing, but he didn't see any sparks. He tore up the Chucker's book and added the pieces, thinking paper would catch fire more easily. He rubbed all night, but it still didn't work. Reluctant to give up, Chuck tried a different method of rubbing. This time, not only did he fail to start a fire, but he also ended up with a large wound on his hand. Frustrated, he threw the volleyball, but after throwing it, he had to retrieve it. Looking at the bloodstains on the volleyball, Chuck thought it resembled something. He drew a few lines on the volleyball, creating a semblance of a face, and thus Wilson was born. From then on, the volleyball became Chuck's only friend on the island. Whenever he looked at it, it felt like someone was with him, and it made him feel much better. He persevered with his fire-making efforts. Finally, he succeeded. Eating the crab and dancing with joy, Chuck was as happy as a child weighing 200 pounds. Chuck had just finished eating when the crab's toothache started to attack. The pain made Chuck cry out for help. After the pain subsided, he pressed the ice skates against his tooth and hit it with a large rock, which was quite extreme. The pain was so intense that Chuck fainted. 4 years had passed in the blink of an eye. Chuck had become like a primitive man, and the volleyball had also changed its appearance. One day, Chuck was suddenly awakened by a piercing noise. It turned out to be the sound from the crashed airplane's toilet door. Chuck placed the door on the shore, hoping someone would see it. However, a gust of wind knocked the door over. Chuck looked at the door and thought, this door has been drifting in the sea for 4 years and is still in good condition. It would be perfect as a sail. His heart, which had been dormant for 4 years, was reignited. He began building a boat, starting a fire, chopping down trees, and stripping the bark into strips to make wood and rope for the boat. Chuck assembled the boat frame with wood and used tape to secure the stressed areas. However, the rope was still insufficient. Chuck climbed to the mountain top again, where he had previously left a rope intended for suicide. Now this rope became his last hope. The raft was quickly completed. 4 years of island life had taught Chuck to observe the wind direction and wait for the right moment. Chuck, with the volleyball and the unopened package, began his journey confidently. He encountered the giant waves that had overturned him 4 years ago, but this time, he timed his sail correctly and successfully passed through the waves. Looking back at the island where he had lived for 4 years, Chuck felt a sudden sense of reluctance. No one could understand the hardships he had endured, but he had to return to society as his loved one was waiting for him. Chuck sailed further and further away, and the island slowly disappeared from the horizon. On the vast, boundless sea, he drank rainwater when thirsty and ate sea fish when hungry. However, one night, a sudden storm swept away the sail from the raft, and Chuck fell into a coma. When he woke up, he found that his companion of 4 years was gone. Seeing the beloved volleyball drifting further away, Chuck jumped into the sea to retrieve it. But things did not go as planned, and he could only watch helplessly as his friend drifted further and further away. From then on, Chuck was despondent, tossing aside the oars, and lay quietly on the raft, resigning himself to fate. But just then, a cargo ship appeared on the horizon, and Chuck was finally rescued. The company held a welcome ceremony for him, but the person Chuck wanted to see the most was Kelly. However, 4 years had changed everything. Kelly had already married. At night, Chuck looked at the pocket watch he had fought so hard to protect, and finally found the courage to visit Kelly. Kelly had been waiting for him all along. Chuck knew in his heart that he had completely lost her. He returned the pocket watch that had accompanied him for 4 years to Kelly. Seeing the rusted watch, Kelly understood how much this man had loved her, but they could no longer go back. Chuck ultimately delivered the package that carried his faith to the client. He left a note beside the package that read, "Thank you. This package saved my life." Thus the film ends. Watching this movie, I felt the insignificance of life but also its resilience. In the face of life's difficulties, we will always find the courage and strong will to face the challenges that come our way.